Ian, Chris, welcome, and looking forward to hearing more about the ERTC refund and how your firm and organization works to help nonprofits and small businesses apply for these refunds and get money that they are rightfully deserve. So take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ricky, for having us. Ian and I are the co-founders of MaxERTC. We are a consulting firm that specializes in helping for-profit and nonprofit organizations receive money from the Employee Retention Tax Credit Program. You'll hear it called the ERTC, right? That stands for Employee Retention Tax Credit. Some others call it the Employee Retention Credit. That's a little bit less of a mouthful, so maybe we'll call it the ERC for today's purposes. The ERTC is a fully refundable tax credit that was established from the 2020 U.S. CARES Act, the same CARES Act that gave birth to the PPP loan. I think many organizations received the PPP loan, and that was very helpful for a lot of profit and for-profit and non-for-profit organizations. It was a real lifeline for the U.S. economy. At the time of the CARES Act, the government wanted to create, again, a financial stimulus package to help reward U.S. employers for keeping Americans employed. It was a real admirable program, right? It helped a lot of organizations keep their staff on payroll. At the time of the CARES Act, organizations had to choose between the PPP or the ERTC. So that's where a lot of misconceptions about the ERC were born, was that everyone, rightfully chose the PPP. It was an easier program to apply for. There was more money there, so organizations naturally went for the PPP. In late 2020, Congress amended the legislation through the Consolidated Appropriations Act and added the ability for organizations to receive both PPP and ERC. This was a big moment. In addition to adding that ability for organizations to receive both PPP and ERC, that's when they added that second PPP loan. So again, this is where the PPP got all the big press. Everybody said another PPP loan, let's go apply for it, great. And they sort of left the ERC, by the wayside. But they also, what flew under the radar was that they quadrupled the size of the ERC, because they included at the time they included 4 quarters in 2021. They've since pulled one of the quarters, but for simplicity purposes, they included 2021, and that expanded the size of the ERC by a multiple of 4. So here we have the PPP. Here we are in 2023, early 2023. The PPP is long expired. Hopefully everybody on today's webinar received their PPP loan, and that helped their organizations. But the PPP is expired. And the ERC or the ERTC is still available to organizations, and not many organizations know about it, again, because of all the misconceptions early on in the program, right? The fact that you had to choose the PPP or the ERC, and then the fact that the PPP was so much bigger. But now the ERC, and many of us expect the ERC to be bigger, to be as big, if not bigger, than the PPP program. And that's one way to sort of roughly ballpark the size of an ERC if an organization is eligible. This is a pretty rough rule of thumb, but you can somewhat safely say that if you're eligible for the ERC, it's going to be around the same amount as your PPP loan. So I think when you tell people that, that really strikes a chord, because for most people, the PPP loan was quite significant, relative to the size of your organization. So here we have the CARES Act. Here we have the ERTC, and there's still time to file. Although, time is getting a little shorter now. because the formal deadline is you have to, well, along with the ERC, you have to amend the 941s. This gets into how we capture the ERC credits, right? With PPP, you went to your bank and it came in the form of a refundable loan. The ERC at its inception came in the form of a tax credit. So every organization in America files a 941 or in the way every quarter. Even if you're a tax exempt organization, you report your wages. So, and this is another challenge, especially for nonprofits, is because when you mention the word tax credit, that throws them for a loop, because a lot of times you'll hear, well, we're a tax exempt entity, so why would we apply for tax credits? Well, you're still eligible for these credits, and so don't let that fool you. The word tax credit, the fact that you pay employees and they're W-2 employees, and that you file those quarterly wage reports means that that's how you're going to capture these credits. So what happened was, if you filed for these tax credits at the time that you were filing your quarterly wage reports with the government, with the IRS, then you would just take that amount away from whatever you were paying in taxes. But because you've already filed that, you have to file for these tax credits retroactively. And so what that means is you have to amend your 941s. You have to file 941Xs. So in order to do that, you just fill out the 941X, you apply to the government, and you tell them that you overpaid your wages according to the ERC program, and they issue you a refund check. So that is how the compensation comes to the organization now, is in the form of a refund check. So it's no longer a tax credit, it's just a check from the government. What is the ERC worth? Well, it's up to $26,000 per employee. That's the maximum. And very rarely do companies or organizations achieve that maximum per employee. But even if it's half of that or a quarter of that, the math adds up pretty quickly, and you can do the math for your organization. And I think most organizations, again, will find it quite significant and quite meaningful. It's pretty easy to get a claim over $100,000, seeing as, if you are eligible for the max, all you'd have to have is 4 employees. But even if you only had, if you're eligible for half of the max, then you'd only need 8 employees to get over 100,000. So usually that number, again, is quite meaningful. And the majority of businesses and nonprofits will qualify due to the generous nature of the program. I think I touched on this, that PPP borrowers are also eligible for the ERC. That's again, a big misconception of the whole program. So I'm here to dispel that and let you know that there is still time. And even if you received a PPP, you can receive an ERC. Not to get too deep into the weeds on the effect of the PPP loan on the ERC, but if you try and boil it down, in a nutshell, what it is that you can have received a PPP and apply for an ERC. What you can't do is you can't what's called double dip. So if you apply the PPP dollar to a certain employee over a certain qualified period, right? That was what it was for. You cannot apply for an ERC dollar for that same PPP dollar. So that's where the term double dipping comes in. You can't apply for ERCs for the same amount, for the same employee or the same period that you applied for a PPP dollar. But invariably, there's if an organization is eligible for an ERC, there is money in and around the PPP, because if you remember back during your PPP application, you were only allowed to apply for 2.5 months of payroll. And so if you're eligible for the ERC, it's usually a greater period than 2.5 months. So that's where most of the ERC dollars can come in addition to the PPP. There are multiple ways nonprofits can qualify. The 2 main ones for organizations to qualify for the ERC are what's called the gross receipts decline test. And that is a very standard black and white test in which quarterly gross revenue are going to be analyzed from the pre-COVID period of 2019 to the post-COVID period of 2020 and 2021. So if your organization experienced a decline in revenue from any comparable quarter, again, in 2020 or 2021, compared to the same quarter in 2019, then you become eligible in that quarter, and most often not the following quarter. It's one of the nuances of the program, but very rarely do you see an organization become eligible for just one quarter. They again, this is where they were quite generous, and they said, if you qualify for one quarter, we're going to give you the following quarter. So that's the most objective test in the ERC to qualify is the gross receipts decline test. The second test is a much more subjective test. That's the government full or partial shutdown test. That's a test that applies to organizations that experienced a decline in operations or profitability due to a governor mandate. Usually, it's an executive order. Really, what it boils down to is the best way to think about it is, was there a legal impediment from your organization operating in a comparable manner, right? Many of the states, especially in the North and in the West, governors took a very conservative approach to COVID and said to a lot of organizations, shelter in place or stay at home. So a lot of organizations pivoted to remote working and teleworking, which, can be analyzed with our help. So that's something that your organization should keep in mind. And, we have a lengthy government effect or government shutdown spread sheet that we're going to give to you to fill out to see if, we think there's a government shutdown case there. So those are the two main tests to become eligible. And there's another one that if organizations started after COVID, after February 15th of 2020, that is a much lower bar to qualify. And we can discuss the criteria for that, but that's something that if any organization started after February 15th of 2020, then, you'd be hard pressed to meet an organization that started after February 15th that is not eligible. So for any of you out there that it started after COVID started, then this program is most certainly going to apply to you. Just to walk through our process, we determine ERTC eligibility through a complementary qualification analysis. That's a pretty simple process. We're going to take a look at those quarterly revenue figures from 19, 20, and 21 to see if you meet the gross receipts decline test or gross revenue decline test. There's also, again, the government shutdown form, which we'll ask you to fill out to see if there's potential there. But that's definitely complementary. From there, if we determine that an organization is eligible, congratulations. That's when we get working. We're going to collaborate with the organization and whoever does their accounting or their bookkeeping or whoever does their payroll, and we're going to gather all the necessary info. There's some in there. You've got to really get into the weeds on the payroll, the detailed payroll reports. That's where the claim will be calculated, the size of the claim. That leads us to the underwriting of the claim. Again, we're gonna compile the data that we need in order to calculate the claim, and in that, we're gonna attempt to maximize the claim while factoring in the PPP loan and making sure that we're not double dipping and we're applying all the guidelines and the rules for the program. That is where much of the nuance and the value gets added is calculating the PPP into the ERC calculation and trying to maximize every dollar, because we know that every dollar is important to especially to nonprofit organizations who have a challenge in staying stay funded. So that's what we're going to try and do with the calculation. After we calculate it, we're going to turn and we're going to go ahead and file the ERTC with the IRS. We do that again by amending the quarterly payroll reports that you issue or file to the government, and then we sit tight and wait for the checks from the government to come to our clients. Do we have another slide after? Oh yeah. Yeah. So to sort of sum it up, there is still time. If an organization is eligible in Q1 of 2020, which most organizations are, because usually there was some component of government shutdown there at the end of March in 2020. The deadline is that organizations, businesses have 3 years from when they originally filed their 941s or their quarterly payroll taxes. So that puts us up against somewhat of a deadline to try and get these done, but there is still time, which is nice, and I'm glad we're able to get with you on this webinar and let you know about this program ahead of the deadline, because it would be a shame for organizations to miss this simply because they didn't know it was out there, which leads me to one of the biggest challenges, and Ricky and I and Ian and I talk about this a lot, is awareness, right? That not that many organizations know about this. You might hear it on the radio, or you might get an email from a consulting group like ours that's doing this, but there is still time, and we'd be happy to help. I think it can do a lot of good to a lot of organizations who, again, could benefit from the financial help. Just to touch on the cost of the service, we charge a 12% contingency fee, which means everything up until you receive a check from the government will be complimentary, right? There's no fees or costs associated with the analysis or the filing until the organization receives a check from the government, which will be 12% of whatever we can help you get back from the IRS for this program.
Very nice. Thank you, Chris. I do have a few things to point out. So just to share, Mission Met went through this process. Because of when we started the business, we actually weren't eligible for PPP. I had another business that I was able to take advantage of that. But Mission Met went through the process with you all. I think we started kind of very early fall, and I think you were both surprised at kind of how quickly, and that time was kind of a low time for the IRS and processing things. But how quickly we were able to get our checks. So we actually got all of our payments prior to the end of 2022, and we squared up with you before the end of the year. So I think we're all set. But the process was really seamless from our end, to from the initial qualification conversation and applying on the website and uploading the forms, to that second review and analysis and pulling reports from our payroll provider, which is Gusto. It was all pretty seamless, and both of you were helpful in ensuring that we submitted the right things and asked some follow-up questions and that sort of thing. So there's that. One thing I want to highlight, Mission Met wasn't part of these more subjective tests, but I think in our conversations, we've talked about how just as an organization, MaxERTC is a little more on the conservative side. Yes, you're trying to maximize the ERTC amount, but you're also conservative, and you're not going to kind of push the boundaries of that. And part of that is that you provide some level of kind of risk mitigation from an auditing perspective and that sort of thing. So can you talk about the risks of doing this incorrectly, and maybe any things that if people were to do it on their own, or somebody who's untrained with this, and what your consulting practice does to kind of protect against that.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Ricky. It's I think from day one, Ian and I we're pretty diligent and pretty intent on maintaining a conservative approach to helping organizations file for the credits. From a pretty quick research on the employee retention credit, I think you'll start to see, on the first or second page of Google, you'll start to see articles about fraud and about over-aggressive claims, and they're out there, right? I mean, this is a government program that the government had 2 weeks to put this together, and much like you read about the PPP, especially initially with the PPP, there's going to be fraud. We took a very conservative approach, and we've maintained that conservative approach all the way through, simply because that's our nature, and simply because the program is being very generous in its nature, and we don't want to be a part of anything that's not we think falls under the guidelines or the intention of the program. So thanks for pointing that out, Ricky. One of the nice things about this program is I do not think there's much risk involved at all. I mean, the government, the revenue decline test is a very objective black and white test. I mean, if it's 20.1%, and that's your revenue decline quarter over quarter, you're in. If it's 19.9, you're out. I mean, it's just that way, which is nice about the gross receipts test. The government shutdown test is, the much more subjective, much more gray area, and that's where a lot of organizations and consultants are taking a more aggressive approach, and that's okay. I mean, there's no, again, they had 2 weeks to write this, so everybody's entitled to their interpretation. But at the end of the day, even if an organization does apply under the government shutdown test, and it does get audited, which we offer full audit protection for the length of the program, then we're ready to defend our stance. And if God forbid, the IRS didn't agree with us, then you'd simply have to give back the money. That's really the greatest risk involved in all of this. But again, we're only going to suggest or recommend the government shutdown test if we think there's a very, very, very strong case. We're happy to help with the gross receipts test, and again, that's an easy one. But with the government shutdown test, we're going to take a long look with the client, with the organization, and explain to them in detail, why we think there's a potential case for the government shutdown clause here, and if they want to file, ultimately it's their decision. But really the risk is quite limited in the amount of capital that the organization is going to receive from the government. So.
That was muted. Thank you. We do have one question from Audra, an organization called Things That Creep. If you're interested in snakes and spiders and all sorts of creepy crawly things,
yeah,
go check out their website. So she asks, are there any minimum number of employees that you need to have employed during those periods in order to qualify?
No minimum.
Great. So for those that are on the line, if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand and we can unmute you. Sandy, I see you're turning your video on, so maybe that means that you're interested. So I'll allow you to unmute and go ahead.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Very helpful. I work for a nonprofit. We are a senior center, so our typical operation is classes and activities and congregate meals, but we also have a home delivered meal component. And because of additional COVID related funding and a very generous donor community, we don't qualify for the reduced income, reduced revenue. We were very blessed and strategic about applying for additional funding support. But we had to close our center down for 18 months. So we switched all of our meal provision to home delivered. And we switched all of our classes to Zoom and things like that. So we remained open every day. So do you think that qualifies as required government shutdown?
Yeah, that's, you know, as is, you know, most government shutdown cases, you know, you've really got to get in there and look at it and have a lengthy conversation. What state are you in?
California.
So, I mean, I'm interested to hear Ian's take on this, but you know, one type of organization we've helped several times are schools, and you know, the IRS is clear about, you know, one of the number one examples they use in the government shutdown test is restaurants, and over they cite the fact that even though restaurants might not have suffered a decline in revenue, because every state's governor mandated that restaurants shut down, at least initially, you know, in some states it ran through 2021, where restaurants could not operate their in-room dining, or at the very least had to operate at a limited capacity. So much like your senior center, much like a school, you know, they pivoted towards takeout or towards delivery or, you know, towards some other form of generating revenue. And a lot of restaurants did as well, or if not better than they did pre-COVID. And so the IRS is clear that they are an organization, or they are a type of industry that was affected by governor mandates because they could not operate in a comparable manner, right? They could not serve their customers in room dining. Your senior center, I think you'd have quite a good case, right? That if your center was closed down, right, that you were not able to operate in a comparable manner, right? And so, you know, again, it's gray, but you know, much like a lot of schools that we helped, you know, they pivoted to remote learning. But because they gathered, private schools, because they gathered their tuition at the start of the school year, there's no decline in revenue. And so, but you know, everybody we've talked to, and you know, we talk to our peers in the industry a lot, because you know, there's so much uncertainty in this program and so much gray. And you know, invariably when I talk to my peers, we talk to our peers, it's schools, senior centers, restaurants, they sort of fall under that same case where really you couldn't serve your clients, right? I mean, you could not. I mean, a senior center is in some ways all about the human connection. And so I would say, yeah, it's definitely worth a conversation, and definitely worth, you know, us presenting you with the facts of the program and the guidelines, and ultimately giving you as much information as possible to make the right decision. But I would definitely enjoy having the conversation about your organization. And you know, there was one other point I was going to put, that it doesn't have to be a decrease in revenue. It can be a decrease in hours open, right? If you're restricted from opening your senior center, or it can be a governor mandate that limited your ability to employ your employees, right? If you had a certain aspect of the organization that your senior center, I'm assuming, paid some employees, you know, what percentage of your employees, this is where you have to get into the program and really take a long analysis, a longer look, is did your organization have employees who you paid prior to COVID that you couldn't keep on because of COVID, because of the governor mandates, because you couldn't employ those employees to come into the center and have them clean, cook, take care of patients, you know, whatever it is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be all about revenue. It can be payroll, it can be hours. There's a couple others. Ian, I'm interested to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, and you know, one important thing to keep in mind with the government shutdown qualification is that it has to be something that was out of the organization's control and not just a decision that the organization made. You know, you mentioned being closed for 18 months, and you know, so it would need to be reflected in the, you know, either state or local mandates. You know, we would want to research the linkage there to the applicable state or local mandates to connect, you know, and substantiate that closure. And then on top of that, as Chris was mentioning, is getting into the nominal impact, which the IRS defines as 10%. So, you know, trying to quantify, you know, through those different avenues that Chris was mentioning, you know, what portion of operations you know, that existed in 2019 that made up at least 10% of operations, you know, what was forced to go away due to mandates during COVID and did not continue. And so, you know, that's when you start to look into those different options that Chris was mentioning.
Okay, thank you. That's all very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that this, you know, that Sandy's question highlights is that there are multiple ways to qualify, and there are simple tests. And I think a lot of organizations may look at, you know, a lot of nonprofits did receive, you know, extra dollars during some of these timeframes, and, you know, they'll just disqualify themselves. But really, you know, Ian and Chris, you've worked with many organizations that initially they thought, well, we can't qualify. They had an initial conversation, said we don't believe that we're going to qualify. But after you went through the process with them and talked through these various scenarios, and there are some other more complex tests that you've shared with me, and not the details, like my eyes glaze over, but that, you know, there have been organizations that have been able to qualify that, you know, on the simple test maybe didn't. So so you're encouraged to kind of just start that conversation, you know, with the MaxERTC team I've provided. I'm happy to stay on if there are other questions from anybody on the line. This is all being recorded, and you'll be provided with a copy of this to take back to your team. I provided some next steps. I'll also share those in the follow-up email. So are there any other questions from anybody else here at the moment? Well, great. Ian or Chris, are there any last kind of closing thoughts that you want to share? Otherwise, I'll thank you and encourage everybody to have a great day.
No, I think we've touched on pretty much everything. Sandy's question was a good question. I think it, you know, I think it again, it highlights that, you know, most organizations, you know, should inquire, right? I mean, it's worth a look. But I think that's the best way to look at it is, you know, because the service comes without a fee or without a charge until you get something. You know, why wouldn't you look at it, right? It's only found money, as a lot of people refer to it as. So we would just want to say thanks to Ricky and Mission Med for putting this call together. And you know, we always have an extra satisfaction and soft spot for helping nonprofit organizations. You know, that's really really helps us find satisfaction in doing what we do. So thank you all for attending, and you know, we look forward to helping each and every one of you if you have interest.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much. Have a great, wonderful day and rest of your week, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.